Posso mandar linha escura?
Anda.
Exo tu achega?
Expo que
Vai ser, no? That's a big issue.
after que CEO company legal. Macam kinga.
Yeah, que bom no meio.
Yeah. And then
Well, I think it's stuff.
I see. Okay, so much here. Here. Starting for a question.
Past 10 or past 10?
Past 10.
Yesterday we said for past 10 and started for past 10.
I know. We always started with 10 and then whatever else happens. This is our first.
Yeah.
Angena.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to do that now. Cool. We just put it up. So is that? And then I'm getting. Let me see. Yeah, so I'm looking if this works for you. Yeah. So yeah, we should be on the line now. So cool. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah. Cool. Alright.
Mr. How do we pronounce your name? Degambur.
My surname is Degambur, sir.
Yes. How do we pronounce your surname?
Degambur.
Degambur. Hey.
That's correct.
Degambur. I would have said Degambur.
That's
okay.
Fine.
Yeah, we are just going to quickly go through the formalities. Advocate Nile is going to do that, and then, you know, you will be taken through the paces by Ms. Abrams. Ms. Advocate Nile.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mr. Degambur.
Good morning, ma'am.
Are you going to take an oath or are you going to affirm?
I'm going to take the oath.
Thank you very much then. Mr. Nash Degambur, do you swear that the evidence you're about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If that is so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God. I do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Degambur. You have now been sworn in as a participant in the hearings.
Thank you, Advocate Nile. Ms. Abrams.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Degambur.
Good morning.
Are you well this morning?
I am very well, and you, sir?
Very well, thank you. My name is Lloyd Abraham. My task here is to assist you to present your story before the Ombudsman. So we have received your submission. And
Okay.
so it's quite a short submission. So we take it that you are going to speak to the submission and you're going to elaborate on issues that you have raised. So I just want to say that you have been allocated the next hour and a half to tell us your story. And so please pace yourself in such a way that within that time allocated, you would have finished telling your story. And I also want to say that where you make allegations against people, please make sure that you are as specific as possible. Because, you know, you've taken an oath and you're going to tell us nothing but the truth. So be as specific as possible. And where we do not understand what you are saying, we'll ask you questions. So there'll be interjections from any one of us here from time to time to clarify issues. So if you could start then maybe by giving us a background of who you are and your involvement in the game, you know, until what brought you here. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Like I said, my name's Nash Degambur. I've been involved with Eastern's cricket for the better part of 20 years on and off. I did a brief stint on the Eastern's board. The bulk of my time with Eastern's was spent with our junior structures. And then in the last 5 odd years with the senior structures, and mainly in terms of what we term emerging clubs, black or non-white clubs within Eastern's Cricket Union. Cricket is basically one of my vices, if you want to call it that. It's something that I love, I'm passionate about. And in my humble opinion, it needs fixing.
Yes.
Please continue, Mr. Degambur.
Would you like me to start with my submission? Or
yes, sir.
If
that's what you prefer, start with it and elaborate on any issue that you think needs elaboration.
Okay. Again, like I said, I've been involved with this union for the better part of 20 years. I spent 5 years while my son was in Gauteng, so I got an idea of the difference between Easterns and Gauteng. And then when my son went to university, he went to Tuks, and I saw another aspect of cricket administration. And about 6 years ago, we came back to Easterns. And I was actually shocked and astounded, because one of my first comments to one of the directors was, I cannot understand that this union has regressed to the extent that it has. And they all looked at me like I was stupid, you coming from another planet or something. But at the same time, I got involved with a few like-minded people that saw that there was something drastically missing, wrong, an imbalance, for lack of a better word, in terms of how things were done in this union, namely...
Mr. Degambur?
Yes, sir.
Before you proceed, please explain what you mean by regression. You say you went back and you found that the union had regressed so much. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, I just didn't catch that last part.
I'm asking you to explain what you mean by regression. You say you went there and you found that the union had regressed so much. So what do you mean by regression?
Just the way things were done, the lack of professionalism, the kind of disrespect for the game, for the players, the way the facility and the conduct was very different to what I experienced when I left here.
Yes.
Versus when I came back.
Yes, sir.
To this union. Yes. And again, like I said, I was actually comparing how Gauteng, for example, or the school my son was at, conducted its cricket, how Northerns conducted their cricket, and how we were conducting our cricket at Easterns.
Just for clarification again, which region does the Easterns Cricket Union cover?
I beg your pardon, sir?
Which region does it cover, the Easterns Cricket Union? What is
the entire Ekurhuleni region.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's essentially the east of Johannesburg.
Thank you. Now, just in relation to your view that there was a regression at the union when you came back, you say that for a long time the union has been run like a spaza shop. Please explain that.
Okay. To start with, this union had one of the longest standing CEOs in Mr. Kasim Suleiman. This union had a fair amount of money in its investment account. In excess of 19 million at any given time while he was the CEO. Yet, when you looked at facilities, to call them substandard is an understatement. And if you looked at facilities in the townships, they were basically non-existent, and to date are still non-existent.
Okay.
We have 10 black clubs within our structures. They are termed emerging clubs. Black, colored, and Indian clubs are termed as emerging clubs. I'm specifically talking about the black clubs. Now, of those 10 clubs, there are 2 clubs that have facilities. The rest have less than basic facilities. How do these people, do these communities produce players, compete, and not have any facility? How do we bring about quality of players? We keep saying that we don't have players of color, we don't have black players. If they don't have the facility, they don't have anything, the most basic of things, how do we bring them up to standard, to compete with any of the other counterparts?
Now, let me take you back to where you say at some stage the union had no less than 19 million in its investment accounts. Yet there was no investment in facilities, particularly in disadvantaged areas.
Yes, sir.
Are you talking about what happened in the past, or is it the case now? In other words, in terms
well,
of...
it happened in the past.
Yes, sir.
It happened in the past, and that scenario still prevails.
I see.
The townships still have no facilities.
Okay. Thank you. Please proceed.
So, again, when we started what was called, it was started by a director, Mr. Peter Bonia, what was termed an emerging club forum, where people of color, black, Indian, and colored people formed a body to represent the interest of previously disadvantaged people. That body was headed by the said director, and it found many discrepancies in terms of things like more than one MOI that Eastern Cricket Union were operating under. So there was an MOI at office. There was a different MOI, CSA. And we still have not included, we suspected there was a different MOI at CIPRO for the company. The difference in the MOIs leave a lot to be desired. Why would a company have more than one MOI? And we started finding out when a dispute was declared that one example is that a voting dispensation, a white club would have 2 votes or 3 votes, while a black club would only have 1 vote at an AGM or at any SGM for that matter. Around 2017, things started getting heated and messy in terms of this union. This body then got involved, wrote to CSA, and declared a dispute with the union. CSA intervened, and by agreement, appointed Judge Bernard Ngwepe to have a look at the dispute and pass some sort of resolution. So that happened, and the judge made recommendations which were accepted. And unfortunately, by then, that said director became president of this union, Mr. Vonya. He then disbanded this emerging club forum. And unfortunately, up until today, the recommendations that were made by Judge Bernard Ngwepe have still not been implemented by this union. Now, the fundamental things in Judge Ngwepe's report was go back to your union, fix what was wrong, and any decision that was being made or taken in terms of emerging or non-white clubs, they had to be involved in the process. Again, unfortunately, that has still not happened to date.
So
there's a process in place.
Sorry, what's the name of the president who disbanded the Emerging Clubs Forum?
Peter Vonya.
Peter Vonya.
Vonya. Vonya.
Oh, I see. Okay, please proceed.
We have since restarted that process to get this body back on track. We've written to the board. We know that the board has discussed the matter, and we are waiting them to come back and give us a time to meet to discuss a way forward.
Just 2 things from that, Mr. Degambur. What reason did Mr. Vonya provide for disbanding the forum?
So with all honesty, I can only draw my own conclusion on that.
Yes.
But I think Mr. Vonya is more qualified to answer why he
fair enough.
Did what he did.
That's fair enough. How does the forum work alongside the board? How do you relate to each other?
It hasn't, because there hasn't been the inclusion to date. There hasn't been the interaction to date between the board and the emerging club forum.
So, but you guys are not represented in the board?
No, sir.
I see. Please proceed.
Now, that as it is poses a problem because, one, it's now 3 years down the line with us not moving forward, with emerging clubs sitting with absolutely nothing. How much longer is that going to take? I don't know. How long is a piece of rope? I'm not sure. Up until that is implemented, and the one thing that I need to stress, this representation is only for emerging clubs, not any other club, not a white club. It is for Black, Indian, and colored clubs.
So, Mr.
The
Degambur,
reason for that is,
sorry, I apologize. You say that it's been 3 years now since Judge Mwepe made those recommendations and they've not been implemented. Have you approached the CSA about it?
look, no. The Emerging Club Forum did not, no, we did not approach CSA. What had happened in the meantime was that quite a few of, there was a lot of infighting, if I may call that, within ECU. Back and forth, discord amongst board members, people getting voted in, people getting voted out, people resigning. It's just been, a crazy period of time. Last year, unfortunately, came COVID. Nothing basically happened. Now we're hoping that, with some form of cricket starting again, so that, some form of engagement will start and some resolutions made, in terms of moving this whole process forward.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Now I'm gonna, when I say, also in the Ngwebe report, there are, issues when I say this was run like a spaza shop. In his report, he states where family members of the CEO were involved in travel arrangements for the teams, bookings. Family members were involved in catering at the union. No open process, for people to submit tenders. And unfortunately, the one president had his security company working at this union. Again, things like that pose problems because they become the only beneficiaries.
Please proceed, sir. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Okay. And we get down to directors. of this union where quite a few instances of wrongdoing. To start with, Mr. Vonia resigned as president, but before he resigned as president, he was facing charges by this union, which he has still not faced to date. We have instances of where independent directors become involved in operational issues. They just resign after they get involved. They get paid out by this union for supposedly coming and doing a business rescue plan, and they just leave, resign, and they're done, not held accountable for their actions. We have a director that signed a contract for a coach, head coach of the semi-pro side, where the board had mandated a 1-year extension to the contract. That director, with the acting CEO, go and sign essentially a 3-year contract for the said coach.
Mr. Degambur, who's the director and who's the acting CEO you're talking
Well, the
about?
director, there was Steph Duvenacher,
Yes.
and the acting CEO was Hilton Norkia.
Okay. And you earlier said that an independent board member would be...
The independent board member was Tota Setsotso.
Who did the business rescue mandate? Who was given that mandate?
Again, firstly, he should never have been in that position, because in terms of in terms of ECU MOI, you had to be resident in Ekurhuleni,
Yes.
in the area, in the district, to serve as an independent director. This person lived in Sandton. Gets appointed as an independent director because he knew Mr. Vonia, or Mr. Vonia knew him. He loses his independence by getting involved in operational matters. And he gets paid to supposedly do a business rescue plan for ECU. The board needs to come and explain. There are some members on the board that were involved, that were part of the board. They need to come and explain how did that happen and what was the corrective action and how do we stop that from occurring again. Then we have another issue of the appointment of a CEO, Mr. Mposiopa. Appointment was done by a CSA person, supposedly working for CSA, Chantal Moon. as a CEO, this person did not even have reference checks done in terms of his appointment to this union.
Who's the person again?
Mpo Siopa.
Okay.
And in terms of the Fundutsi report even, it shows that there was some sort of collusion in this appointment. Now, I'm bringing that up because this person was appointed on a huge salary. He brought nothing to this union. He's costed this union and essentially has set us back a year because that CCMA case is still not concluded.
Which CCMA
Mr.
case?
Vonya was
Sorry, which
where
CCMA
he's
case?
taken, where Mr. Siopa has taken the union to the
I
CCMA
see.
claiming unfair dismissal now, because he was dismissed. And there again, Mr. Vonya was involved. Now, the board needs to come and explain what happened, how it happened, and again, corrective measures. How do we stop that from happening again? Every time things like this happen, it sets this entire union back. We lose time, we lose money, we don't get services. Things sit in limbo. For as long as things sit in limbo, we're deadlocked. Is there anything else that you would like me to elaborate on in terms of that?
Not from my side, sir.
Yes, Mr. Degambur. I just want you to speak on CSA's, involvement in the union and how they have been able to address these governance issues in the union.
So, sorry, could you please repeat that?
No problem, Mr. Degambur. In terms of your email, you have a section where you speak on CSA, right? And you obviously speak about their lack of support and how they have sort of been negligent in how they've assisted the union. I just want you to elaborate on that, CSA's involvement in the issues you've highlighted.
Okay, CSA's involvement in terms of Mr. Siopa, one. We've had involvement by Mr. Welsh-Gwaza. For some reason or the other, again, they had taken a very keen interest in specific aspects of this business. Kugendri Governor was the same. Again, specific aspects, and generally not assisting the union in any way or form, but interfering in the union's affairs. And then also the current president, the directors that are involved, need to come in and put their cases forward. I know this because I've been involved in all of these things, and looking at, and every time you ask a question, more and more issues come up where there was direct involvement by not only those two people, but also Sandisa Ngupa getting involved in ECU, in an autonomous union's affairs.
So, Mr. Degambur, are you saying that the CSA improperly interfered in the appointment
Yes, sir.
of Mposiopa as a CEO?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm sure the CSA will come and answer for that. Sure.
I beg your pardon?
No, I'm saying the CSA will come and answer to that allegation.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
We would like an answer. I would like an answer to that.
Sure.
And I'm going to get down to, you know, we have another major problem in terms of our operational staff. It's sad, but generally, and again, I'm not talking only about black clubs. I'm talking about generally all clubs within our structures, within our union, have a problem in terms of where staff, operational staff, don't actually understand their roles in servicing their constituents, in servicing their clubs, in being proactive in terms of delivery. And it causes a problem because there's no trust, there's no respect, that essentially leads again to a lack of service to the people that you are paid to service.
So which club are you attached to, Mr. Degambur?
I'm currently attached to Tembisa. Now,
yeah.
that is one of the biggest clubs.
Yes.
Biggest areas.
Yes.
In terms of townships.
Yes, sir.
They have nothing. They have two nets, probably. One of the biggest townships in our region. And they're one of the oldest existing clubs. And to date, they have absolutely nothing. They have no facilities. This union has gone and wasted money on court cases. An example, the current president was charged with misconduct for something that he had said on Facebook. That issue went to the Human Rights Council. It went to CSA. And it even went to his workplace where they were looking to have him fired from his job. And it cost this union R500,000 to get rid of one person because of what he said, because of what he stood for. And that person is Tatu Moapi. He was arrested. Essentially, the board that was in place at that time were looking to destroy this person, destroy him, destroy his livelihood, and get him out of cricket forever. Simply because he fought, and he consistently fought for black players, clubs, facilities, and right and wrong. He fought for what was right. Now, in this day and age, something like that happens is unacceptable.
Mr. Degambur, in your email,
Yes, ma'am.
in your email, you have highlighted the fact that the union, the Eastern Cricket Union, is back on board in a way. As you said that, you know, we have settled on a board that shares the visions of our members' council and hopefully represents our needs and vision. And you also state that we are on the road to recovery, but it's very easy to fall back on old habits that might push us back into the dark ages. So in light of that, and the fact that, you know, as in your own words, you state that the cricket union is almost on the road to recovery, how would you like the Ombudsman to assist the union?
Well, there are a couple of things. Like I said, in terms of services, in terms of facilities, in terms of inclusion, in terms of representation. Now, simple thing. We are a non-profit company and a public benefit organization. Who should the recipients of the benefit be? To date, the people of this region are not the beneficiaries of this public benefit organization, of this non-profit company. Up until that happens, where the people, the players, the youth of this region start reaping the benefit. I have a huge problem with, why do we have this if we're going to go and give every spot that we have to an outside player? Why do we have an academy when we're not going to take those players and promote them from within our ranks? Why are we going to give them the opportunity of earning a living, of getting education, going to university? All of those things are there for the taking for our youth, but we're taking that and we're giving it to somebody else. My issue and problem is that I want to see the benefit going to the youth in this region. It's their right. And hence, that is where things need to be put in place, where you cannot take something that is the right of this region and give it to somebody else. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
It does. Thank you very much, Mr. Degambur.
Mr. Degambur, let's talk about coaches. You say in your submission,
Yes, sir.
you say once again, we have a situation where the bulk of coaches think that they are owed their jobs, and it's a matter of them just being gatekeepers that stop players of color from our region to get any quality opportunity. Please elaborate on that.
Well, we've had the problem and issue comes in when coaches are appointed. Every one of them has a KPI. But if you don't hold a coach to his KPI in terms of why are you coaching, what are you coaching for? You're not just going through a process. You go to work in the morning, you throw a couple of balls, and at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock you go home. Now, we've had a situation where we've had a number of coaches that have specifically sidelined and marginalized players from this region, backed players from outside of this region through hundreds of hours of balls to players from outside of this region, groomed players from outside of this region, coached privately, but yet they cannot help and did not help and did not groom their own. Now, in terms of players, I can give you names, I can give you instances of where a white coach, Richard Neves, throws a black player's bag out the change room, saying that it stinks. That same player got sidelined and marginalized. That youngster was knocking on the door of being a spinner within the Titans franchise. He got kicked out.
Did he commit any misconduct at all?
He did not fit the profile because the player questioned that if he is the 12th man and he must then carry and be the water boy for a 3-day match, because he said, but what about the other player? Or now you're being disrespectful and you're questioning me. He got sidelined for nothing. He got sidelined because somebody wanted to be the gatekeeper that stops him from growing, from having an opportunity of his lifetime, but taken away from him.
What's the name of the player?
Tumelo Similani.
Okay.
Now I'll give you Sizwe Zulu.
Yeah.
Player. Now you are a problem. You discipline issues. They're not one saying, hey, but you're talented and let's work on your discipline issues. And the same with our black coaches. They did not back the boy. They just went to the back. Oh, no, but sideline him because he's got discipline issues. Swallow, Zimbini, left a corporate job for contract. It was good. It's never back. Out in the cold, gone. So he doesn't have a contract, doesn't have a job. Tulani, Mbele, had to leave this union and go to Limpopo. This young man has got nothing. This union failed him also. Local boy, decent enough cricketer, but not given quality of opportunity. Oh, he does not fit into the profile. He does not fit into the culture. But this union has never defined the culture. This union has never said to any one of its coaches, this is our culture. This is what you will abide by. It's made up to be a gatekeeper. Neo Polani goes to Africa T20 game and we were embarrassed. I was embarrassed. As a commentator said, you are putting in a boy, a spinner, for him to run around and field. Carl Degambur, Carl Landsberg, oh, you do not fit into my culture, a coach's culture. And our board does nothing. Coach is still untouched. But we've killed off players. We send a youngster, Nzwane, to a bubble. All this young man did was be the water boy for that entire period. Now, sitting in the academy, gets taken there. But a player without a contract, a white player, gets given the opportunity, gets backed. How is that fair? All of these boys at the Kobala, one season, one game, no, you don't fit in. You're no good. A player, Jared Older, talented, doesn't fit in, but we were going to buy a player from outside because we want to win trophies. Forget about, kill off your development, kill off your players. So we talk transformation, but every one of these local players, we just write them off because they're not good enough for somebody. This union at one stage, when Jeffrey Toyana was the coach, had 7 years of color playing in the team, local. Today, we are buying players from outside of this union. I'm sorry, for me that is totally and utterly unacceptable. It just, so why don't we just stop playing cricket then? Because it is just not viable for our youngsters. Just stop. Can this whole thing upsets me. I get very, very angry. And you know, this is the kind. I'm sorry, I got no other word for it. And the thing that saddens me most is that these coaches are credited by CSA. So the one thing that this tribunal does is looks at these things here. Because if you're a lawyer, there's the bar. If you're an accountant, there are bodies. CSA needs to start doing things where if these people are found to have wronged, I will stand there and I will beg for their accreditation to be taken away. They do not deserve to be there. Not my fault. I know what I want. But we cannot have people like this. Because whether you like it or not, whichever way these people are anti-transformation. They don't want transformation. They're not interested in transformation.
Mr. Degambur?
Yes, sir.
I see you're emotional. Do you want to compose yourself?
No, I'm fine, sir.
Do you want to
I'm
continue?
fine.
Now, I want to bring in a topic, and it ties in with what you are saying now. You seem to be saying CSA accredits these coaches.
Yes.
And yet, at union level, these coaches act as gatekeepers, particularly
Yes, sir.
to drive players of color out of the system. So I want you to talk.
Yes.
I want you to talk on the subject of union autonomy from the CSA. Please address us on that, and what, in your view, the impact thereof is. That CSA will most likely say these unions are autonomous. So what is the impact of that?
You see, again, CSA are the controlling body. Okay?
Yes, sir.
They control the purse strings. They control the unions. Now, they write, CSA essentially dictates the rules, because essentially they take the lead, unions need to follow the lead. Now, if CSA are writing the rules, and if they are not enforcing the rules, they're not following up on the rules, they're not verifying the rules, the outcomes, then CSA are the people that are failing transformation. They can't, CSA has an obligation. If CSA is saying the union is autonomous, yes, to some extent, but you are the controlling body. What is your role? If you can't do the job, then say to the unions, because essentially you're saying, well, for as long as you just tick. All you have to do is you just have to tick a box. Pick any number that you want and tick a box, and we will accept it. Then CSA are failing all of us. On what basis is CSA going to hide from their responsibility? I would like an answer. They need to explain that. You're either the controlling body or you're not.
But how then would the clubs be autonomous, what would autonomy mean if they are going to be dictated to by CSA as to what they must do within their own clubs? I can see an argument coming up to say, listen, we are a federation in the sense that we are autonomous in our own clubs or in our provinces, or however the structure is. But if we are autonomous, then you have no right to interfere with the way we run our clubs. Or are you saying there is something in this, the composition or in the constitution of the CSA that gives CSA the power to intervene? I won't say to interfere. To intervene even in the clubs themselves, where in the view of the CSA there is non-compliance with transformation objectives. Since we're talking about transformation, let's concentrate on that. How would we argue with that? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm simply saying if somebody came and said, yeah, but then if you are going to, simply because you are CSA and we are affiliated to you only as affiliates, but we have autonomy to run our own affairs. If you are now going to run our affairs from the center, dictate to us what we should or should not do, to whom we should or should not give contracts and all of that, all in the name of transformation, then, you are interfering with our autonomy. How do you suggest the CSA should deal with that if there was a case that came up where that kind of resistance was mounted by a province?
Sorry, are you done, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Look, there are a couple of things. One, CSA has an MOI. That MOI, every union is supposed to replicate that MOI. Doesn't have to replicate and mirror to a large extent CSA's MOI.
Yes.
Now, you also have the issue of what does the government say? We have to align to CSA, but who's more powerful now? Is CSA more powerful or is the government more powerful? So for me, there has to be a balance. What are the dictates of the Minister of Sport?
But
what are the dictates?
Let's tease that a little bit. What if there is an argument that says, well, the ICC takes a very dim view of government interference in sporting issues. Politicians should deal with political issues. There should be no political interference with sporting codes. I'm not saying that's a right posture, but let's say that would be the attitude of this particular club, to say government has no role here. This is the Eastern's Cricket Union. We have our own rules and regulations. We dictate what the policy should be. We dictate how we get players onto the field. And please don't come and, interfere politically by saying we must have so many black, so many white, or so many colored, or so many Indian players. That amounts to interference. Not even the ICC should interfere. I'm simply trying to find out if that kind of position were to be taken by the Eastern's Cricket Union, that the ICC does not takes a dim view of political interference. Is, in your view, the Minister of Sport or the government not able to intervene? And if it is so, how would it intervene? As you say, because I would like to put that question to the minister when he comes, but I would like to get your views. Yes, Mr. Come.
Please proceed, sir.
Sorry,
Yeah, proceed.
sorry, thank you.
Sure.
There are a couple of avenues. One, then we need to relook this, but then what about SASCO? Would that not be an avenue? And I don't know. The other side is the laws of that would not need to be reviewed somewhere down the line. Because we're not how everything hinges on how we move forward. And if ICC don't want government intervention, then fine. Then we need to find an alternative, change the law, or get SASCOC involved, or maybe just get CSA to become more proactive in terms of getting unions to be more accountable. Because again, I've chosen not to listen to a lot of these, the bulk of these hearings, for the simple reason I didn't want to be influenced. I just wanted to speak from what I know. We deadlocked. We're in crisis. If CSA are not going to take the lead, then who is? Because if you're going to leave unions to do as they please, unfortunately, nothing's going to change. Yeah. People that are unaccountable are going to remain unaccountable. Transformation is never going to happen. Equality is never going to happen. Quality of opportunity is never going to happen. So we're dead in the water.
Just on that issue, Mr. Degambur, again, in your submission on the last page, you say there's a gray area in terms of autonomy of unions and the interference of CSA and SACA when it comes to signing of players. Please tell us of instances of SACA and CSA interfering with the signing of players.
Well, I need to change that, because it's not so much the interference. It is where the thing that became an issue, okay, was essentially where CSA came and redefined a homegrown player. And essentially, in a nutshell, what that said was, only if a player came through from your union into your under-19 Cope Week side is he regarded a local player. Now, in terms of under-19 players, again, we have a history, and I think most unions have the same thing. When it comes to players of color, the bulk of our under-19 players disappear, just vanish. No one asks what happened. You get points deducted for not producing. But what is the incentive then? For having these players come through, and then you just lose them. No one answers. Not one question from CSA as to, you've had 5 players or 6 players coming through under 19. But they just lost. Where did they go? You get punished for not producing because you get scored by CSA.
Yeah.
Mr. Degambur, just
Yes,
again on your last page of your submission, you write there, sir, my appeal to you is that you avail yourself to ECU to actually get a sense of the region, its expectations and its shortcomings. What are you asking the Ombudsman to do there?
Well, essentially what I'm asking for somebody to come to this union, to come and look at and listen firsthand as to what is happening, where we come from, where we are at the moment, and how do we move forward? How do we incorporate? We've had losses, but we also, I think, in comparison to a lot of the other unions, we've made some good gains. How do we improve on those gains? How do we move forward without constantly looking behind our backs? At this point in time, the gains that we've made are just now stagnated. We're not moving. How do we actually move forward? How do we get solid commitments that are honored, not just commitments that are made for the sake of being made and, oh, now we've ticked that box, it's done. If your commitments are made and they are honored, that is what I'm asking for.
Okay. Now, please explain to us, what is the state of affairs there within the union in terms of governance? Is there a board currently in place?
No, there is a board. I think to a large extent, we're fairly fluid, we're fairly clued up. We have people that are prepared to put in the work, but we also have, to some extent, people that don't want to move forward. So it's a challenge, but it's not, an impossible challenge. But for as long as it is a challenge, it's problematic. We kind of sit at an impasse, because sometimes you get the feeling that, yes, we want to move forward, but hey, there's someone or something that wants to hold us back. Cohesion is what I'm talking about, is when we say we're moving forward, let's commit, but again, be accountable. And if you make a commitment, if the board makes a commitment, or if emerging clubs if the traditional clubs make a commitment, hold them to that commitment and fulfill your promises to the people.
Can I raise one last question, Chair?
Yes.
Sure.
Let me put a question that I've put to some of the other participants. And that is a question that comes from a definition of what an ombudsman is, or an ombudsperson. The definition of an ombudsman is that it is an official usually appointed by the government who investigates complaints usually lodged by private citizens against businesses, financial institutions, universities, government departments, or other public entities, and attempts to resolve the conflicts or concerns raised either by mediation or by making recommendations. Now, with that kind of definition as a guide, because I mean, this is not a government institution, what would your thoughts be if the office of the transformation ombuds was a permanent feature for cricket? In other words, instead of Ntsebeza coming in for a month or 6 months, here all the evidence is from Mr. Degambur and everybody else, and then thereafter makes recommendations, but he's not there to implement them. And the report simply gets, put away by CSA, and because the position was temporary. So the question I'm asking, what would your thoughts be if, because of the difficulties that have not been resolved, there was a position of a cricket ombudsman that was permanent but independent of Cricket South Africa.
Sir, the short answer, I would love and welcome that.
Yes.
I would support that 100%. That, like you said, if that position is independent, and I'm positive that our board will support that also.
Well, on that note, we've come to the end of your presentation. Very thought-provoking. And I mean, when I saw your submission, 1.5 pages, I said, oh, we're going to be out of here in 30 minutes. But it was because you were engaging. It's not quantity that is important, it's quality. And
I'm sorry, I have a lot more, but we've run out of time.
Yeah, well, like they say, the office of the Ombudsman is always open until until we say, hey, oh, guy. Yeah, now we want to, we want to give ourselves time to write our report. Thank you very much, Mr. Degambur. And
thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Yes.
And for hearing.
We are adjourning for the next session. Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yes, this is Mr. Who? Now, how do you pronounce your surname? Is it Maluko?
That is correct.
Come again? Moloko.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Moloko, we will advocate is going to administer the formalities of how you are going to testify or to participate in the proceedings, and then thereafter you will be taken through the paces by Mr. Abrams. Advocate Mary.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mr. Moloko.
Good morning, ma'am.
Are you going to take an oath or are you going to affirm?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Do you mind repeating it? Let me just check that my sound is okay.
Yes. Are you going to take an oath or are you going to affirm?
Okay, sorry, do you mind giving me just a second? Let me see which sound works better. I struggled hearing that. Okay, sorry, do you want to try again?
Okay, Mr. Moloko, are you going to take an oath or are you going to affirm?
I'm going to take an oath.
No problem. Mr. Tshoko Moloko, sorry, did you say you'll take an oath or affirm? Sorry.
Take an oath.
Take an oath, okay. Mr. Tshoko Moloko, do you swear that the evidence you're about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If that is so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moloko. You've now been sworn in as a participant in the hearings.
Mr. Abrams.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Moloko.
Good morning.
Thank you for making time to appear before the Ombudsman this morning. And we have received your submission. And our understanding is that it revolves around the inquiry into the matter of emerging clubs and the Eastern Cricket Union. So in other words, you're going to talk to us about the Mwepe report and the aftermath thereof. In other words, what has happened since then, because you seem to highlight the certain issues. So we want to hear from you. And but before you do that, please introduce yourself again. Tell us about your involvement in the game, and then we can then talk about what brings you here. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Just before I start, I'd like to confirm, am I audible?
Yes, you are, sir.
Very much so. And very
Great.
clearly.
So, having slight issues on my side, there's a bit of a delay. So hopefully that won't give us too many challenges. So firstly, to introduce myself, my name is Tshoko Moloko, as already mentioned. I'm currently the chairman of the Midrand Cricket Club and member of the Eastern Cricket Union Members Council.
Which cricket club?
I'm also
Which cricket club?
Midrand Cricket Club.
Which one? Midrand. Okay.
Yes, Midrand.
Thank you.
Mid-rand, eh?
I'm also
It's mid-rand.
yes, Midrand. So this is where the current club that I'm affiliated to. And as I said, I'm also a member of Eastern Cricket Union Members Council. I'm also the current chairperson of the Facilities Committee that was elected by the emerging clubs. I'm a bit wary of time. I would go into Midrand. We are predominantly a black club. Our club constitutes mainly of black members, and we reside in Midrand. Our facilities are outside of Midrand, as Midrand doesn't have sporting facilities. So our facilities are a few kilometers outside of Tembisa. And because of where our facilities are, we were then moved to the Eastern Region. That is how we find ourselves here. Okay, so I already mentioned that I'm the chairperson of the facilities committee, which was elected by emerging clubs. And I also think it's worth mentioning that I'm also a certified level 2 coach.
Yeah, Mr. Moloko, you are coming in and out. I don't know what's going on. Some portions we hear, some portions we don't. I don't know whether those are the challenges that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of an echo too.
I'm experiencing the same on my end, and possibly to do this conversation justice, can I ask for possibly a 5-minute recess so that I can connect on a different device?
Yes. Yeah, I think that will be in order. Let's adjourn and we resume at 5 to 12. Or let's resume at 12 o'clock exactly. Then we know that we'll have a run up to 1:30. 12.
Okay, that works for me. Thank you. Yes. I believe our line is better now.
Okay. Let's put it to the test. Yeah, you were making your introductory remarks.
Yes.
Just continue.
Okay. So maybe for this, okay. So I think I've said my name. I'm the current chairman of the Midrand Cricket Club, member of Eastern's Cricket Council, also chairperson of the Facilities Committee, and I wanted to open with this line that I'm a certified level 2 cricket coach, and which basically means that I'm eligible for a coaching job within the Proteas. I was wondering yesterday if my audience would catch the slight joke, but if not, it's okay, we'll move on. So before I start, I'd like to share a little bit on my motivation and drive to come and have this conversation. It basically stems from a catalyst of an experience that I had. So I've grown up playing cricket from my young days and into my adulthood. So I've been a cricketer pretty much all my life. And when I had turned into an administrator, and this is 2018, 2019, I had the opportunity of attending a cricket game at Willamo Park, which is our home ground for Easterns. And on that day, I had an experience that shook me. This was at a Africa T20 Cup match, which ultimately Easterns won, by the way. But what I witnessed on the day was a player of color that was on the field and who was in the side mainly as a bowler. The young gentleman who I believe, so for tournaments such as these, there are certain criteria that all the sides need to comply with. And one of the criteria was that they needed to field a certain number of players of color and a certain number of players below a certain age. And I believe the age was 19. And so what I witnessed on the day was this young bowler playing, I believe it was a semi-final game. And on the day, he only got to bowl 1 over, being a mainline bowler in the side. And then what stood out was the side consisted of a number of all-rounders whose speciality was in bowling. So they were in the side as a batsman / bowler. And I witnessed a few of them bowling ahead of the young black boy. This struck a chord with me because growing up, you would see it all the time, where you would be in the side just to field numbers, and you wouldn't get an opportunity to bowl, and you didn't get an opportunity to bat. Then the side went on to play, they won the game, and they went on to play in the final. And in the final, yet again, the same boy was in the side. And in the final, again, and in actual facts, I believe in the final, he didn't get to bowl even a single over. I might have the two swapped around, but what I do know is that he bowled 1 over in between the final and the semi-final. And ultimately, Easterns won the tournament. It was a great moment for the union. Everybody was happy, but it left a sour taste in my mouth, having experienced a young budding cricketer who is African being put through the experience of being on the field mainly to tick a tick box.
And what's the player's name? What's the player's name, Mr. Maluko?
The player's name is Neofelani.
So was he a specialist bowler?
Yes.
Because you said others were all-rounders. So
So they were all-rounders in the side.
Yeah.
And when you look at the stats, the all-rounders got to bowl. So the over limitation in T20 is 4 overs.
Yeah.
And the all-rounders got to bowl a few more overs than what he did.
I see.
So having experienced this, I was then taken aback. And the principles that I live by and that I aspire to is that we are a generation that follows from the generation of Utata Nelson Mandela, Steve Biko, Chris Hani, Solomon Mahlangu, and the likes. And having come after a generation like that, I always aspire to follow in the way they carried out their lives. This generation sacrificed for the rest of us to enjoy the freedom that we enjoy today. And my role in cricket is of that view that the current generation needs to make certain sacrifices to ensure that the likes of Neo Felani do not go through some of the cricketing struggles that we had to go through. Because growing up, that was something we were all familiar with, that you play in a side and just to fill the numbers. And I strongly feel that this is something that shouldn't be happening in today's time. That said, however, that was not the end of my discomfort. Following that, the coach of the union went on to win, I think he won 1 or 2 other trophies. And to my alarm, when Cricket South Africa held their annual recognition ceremony, our coach was recognized as Coach of the Year. Now, this left me with a question that with Cricket South Africa overseeing all these criteria that are in place to help drive transformation within cricket, surely it should have been picked. This matter of players being fielded just to tick a tick box should have been picked up somewhere. Now, for the coach who approaches a game that way to go on and be recognized as a Coach of the Year by the mother body for me was shocking, to say the least. Now, that is pretty much my motivation why I am here. Having said that, I will then move on to my first slide, which speaks to the reason why I'm actually here, which is to speak to matters regarding Eastern's Cricket Union.
Yes.
So if you refer to my first slide that speaks to demographics, I first want to paint a picture. Currently, there are 30 cricket clubs within Eastern's Union. Of these 30 cricket clubs, 16 are black and 14 are white. And before I move on, I will be using terms that generally are uncomfortable to use. We prefer not to speak of black and white in the current generation that we live in. So within our union, black clubs are referred to as emerging clubs. So when I refer to emerging clubs, which I will do later on in my presentation, I'm referring to black clubs. Then our white clubs are referred to as traditional clubs.
It's a term that we got to use. The immersion club is a term that we got used to from your predecessor, who also comes from Eastern Province.
All right.
Yes.
It makes my job slightly easier.
And I think, Mr. Moloko, just before you proceed, it's very important that you are as frank as possible. Say it as it is. Do not sugarcoat it at all, because you're not helping the ombudsman if you do that. So if you have to call it black, call it black. If it's white, it's white. Don't be euphemistic about it at all.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Happy with that.
Yeah.
Then, moving on to my second slide, having looked at the demographic split within our union. My second slide speaks to club grants within the union. And I just want to touch on this quickly because I think it paints a picture of how funds are currently utilized within the union. And I do understand and I acknowledge upfront that what I'm presenting here is only a fraction of the monies that are dispersed within the union. But I believe it speaks volumes, which is why I would like to take you through it. So if you look at the top line, which shows the number of clubs, you will see that I've listed the 30, well, I've shown the 30 clubs that are within the union. Below that is the total grant that is given to these clubs. So this grant is there to assist clubs in functioning. The total grant amount is 548,000. And these numbers were pulled from a report of 2019 and 2020. Now, if I may pause just a second, just to gather my thoughts. Now, when you look at this, there's a lot of information, and I believe it's interesting information to analyze, but I won't take you through the whole slide. I just want to point to what I believe are key critical takeaways.
Mr. Maluko, please take us through the breakdown so that we can be able to follow properly.
All right. So I'll take you through the breakdown and then I will highlight what I believe are the key takeaways. So the top line shows the split of the 30 clubs, which is 14 that are white and 16 that are black. Below that, you've got the total grants that are dispersed within the union, which is 548,000 for all the 30 clubs. That split is made up of 3,474,000 that is allocated to white clubs and 174,000 that is allocated to black clubs. I've given an indication of what's the portion. So the portion of the 174 that goes to what are African clubs is 124,000. Then I've gone to show the splits between...
Sorry,
yes.
I apologize. Just so we understand, what is the difference between black and African?
Okay. So the black definition in our country refers to Coloreds, Indians, Africans, and Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay.
So within cricketing circles, when we're speaking about a player of color or a black player, we are referring to those four races.
Yes.
Then the African, which is our difficult to explain, but that is our black people that, as myself and as me and you.
Let me tell you why I'm asking the question, so I need to understand. Are you conveying here that of the 174,200 that was given to black clubs, 124,000 of it went to African clubs? Is that what you are saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
And what's important to note today is that the African clubs is made up of 11 clubs. Then the rest, the Indian and Khaled, is made up of 5 clubs.
Okay.
And doing a quick calculation, those 5 clubs, based on this report, received 50,000, which is half of what the Africans received, which is also interesting.
Okay.
But moving on to where I was, so below that, I've shown the split of what the Premier League clubs within our union get and the rest of the clubs. So the clubs are structured in such a way that the Premier League is our highest league. That is where our semi-pro players and players that will play for that will move on to play for the union are identified. And that league alone gets 475,000 of the grant. Of the Premier League clubs, the ones that are white get 342. And when you speak to numbers, there are 9 white clubs playing the Premier League. And there are 4 black clubs that play in the Premier League. You will see the numbers below the amount, and that number there refers to the number of clubs. The 4 black clubs that play in the Premier League get 133,000 of the grant. So for now, I will leave out the African. I'll leave out the African portion because even though it's important, I believe that the rest of the data paints enough of a picture of what I'm trying to say. Having then, as I mentioned, the Premier League club is our highest league. The rest of the clubs, the rest of the leagues, which is about 4 or 5 leagues that sit underneath that, is what I have shown in the last line. So those leagues get 72,000 as a portion of the grant. There are 5 clubs that do not have a Premier League side that sits in those leagues, and they get 32,000. Then 12 of the black clubs that do not play in the Premier League get only 40,000 of the share of the total grant. Now, why am I showing this to you? And if you look at my slide on the right-hand side, I've highlighted what the key takeaway points from this information is. So the first point is that the Premier League clubs who get 476,000 of the grant get what is 90% of the grant. So of the 548, 90% goes to the Premier League clubs. Then the question is, what is the black portion of these grants? In total, black clubs get 31% of the total grant. There, as I mentioned, there are 4 black clubs that play in the Premier League. These clubs make up 24% of the 31% that I just mentioned, which means that the remaining 12 clubs, the remaining 12 black clubs, only get 7% of the total grant. And when I calculated the averages, that equates to 3,400 Rand as money that is there to support these clubs. Now, this 3,400 is supposed to support them for the whole season. And our cricket season runs for 6 months. So you can imagine 3,400 going to a black club, and predominantly these black clubs are in the township. And for interest's sake, I did an average of what the white clubs get. Across the board, on average, the white clubs get 27,000 to assist them with running of cricket throughout the season. So, okay, thank you, Funisa. Having taken you through these numbers, I just want to share some thoughts, which I'm sure my audience is pretty familiar with. Generally, what you would find in our white clubs is that they are from affluent suburbs. When I'm referring to white clubs, these are generally clubs that have got members that pay affiliation fees. So what happens within cricket clubs is that if a member wants to be a part of the club, they pay a seasonal affiliation fee, which then enrolls them with the club. and assists the club in running, in covering the costs that they would encounter throughout the season. And those range from looking at the facilities that they might have, buying cricket balls for cricket matches, and so forth. So generally, our white clubs have affiliation fees in place. In addition to that, the community that where these clubs are from are generally middle class. So what I'm trying to say here is that these clubs do not come from our purest, from our most poverty-stricken communities. Whereas the black clubs, on the other hand, are generally from those communities where the average income is, from what I've read in passing. Unfortunately, I would love to go to Stats SA to pull out these stats, but the average income is around the 8,000 Rand figure per household. These clubs are unable to charge an affiliation fee. As we can all imagine, in the township, it would be very difficult to ask people to pay an affiliation fee to be a part of the club because they simply do not have those funds. An example is in the community that we operate in. So our cricket club is constituted of members that come from Midrand and members that come from our neighboring township. And when I look at the kids that we work with in our neighboring township, it paints a depressing picture. We've got under 10s, I'll make an example with an under 10 side that plays in our club. These under 10 side go to a school which is called Drake Goga. At the school, they receive a daily meal for lunch. These are the communities that I'm referring to when I'm talking about township sites or township clubs. Then, fortunately enough, the union assists black clubs in transporting them to matches, which I'll speak to later. This is one portion that, in essence, they don't have a choice in, because with us not having facilities in townships, and with black clubs not having funds to move around, if the union didn't cover the transport costs, then black clubs simply wouldn't be playing cricket. But thankfully enough, the union assists black clubs in transporting them. The under 10 side that I'm making an example of also benefits from this benefit. We would pick them up from the school at 7 o'clock in the morning, take them through to a cricket game where they would be there up until, say, about 1 o'clock is when we bring them back. The union will assist us with the transport. Beyond that, the club has to see fit what happens to. Now, with that picture in mind and what I've just presented, right-hand side, you will see that I've given a breakdown of what the grant constitutes of. And what you'll see there is that our Premier League sides are given a lunch grant for when they host a home game. Now, having described the two communities, you have got 9 clubs that come from affluent suburbs getting a grant for their lunch. And here's a club like Midrand servicing under 10s from a township in Galfontein who have to fend for themselves in feeding the child. I think that says enough on its own, and I'll move on. So having said that, as I move on from the slide, I'd like to...
Sorry, just before you
Yes.
move off, on the right hand at the bottom, you say, what is the grant? In other words, you're giving a split, right?
Yes.
And then you're saying senior meeting grant, and you tabulate them. Are these only for premier clubs? Is that what?
So let me take you that maybe briefly.
Sure.
So what the union does is it takes, so these are the different categories that a club can qualify for a grant for.
Yes.
There are certain items that apply to every club.
Yes.
So for instance, the senior meeting grant is allocated to every club that's got a senior side.
Yes.
And that is to assist them in getting to council meetings and so forth.
Mm.
And then there's the admin grant that's pretty much all the clubs get. The Premier League lunch only goes to Premier League clubs. The tablet grant only goes to Premier League clubs as well. The senior field grant. So how the union operates is that they look at how many fields a club has. Then, based on that, you are allocated a grant for the fields that you have. And one can automatically see how that would put black clubs at a disadvantage, because the issue of facilities is not unique only to Easterns. If you go across the country, you will quickly realize that there are a handful. I can probably count them in my one hand. There are a handful of clubs that have got facilities within their townships. So this grant will hardly go to black clubs because we do not have those facilities. And the same would apply to the junior grants that are listed there.
So who decides on the allocation of these grants?
So this is how the union has functioned for the longest of time. So when it comes to discrimination, my opinion is we probably at the tail end of that in-the-face discrimination that we used to encounter, where now it's more systematic discrimination. This structure of grants, as far as I know, has been within the union for as long as before a number of boards were in place. So it was long decided. And this is a conversation. What's interesting about this conversation is that it's a conversation that I've challenged from early when I got to the union. I've requested this data from the union for the longest of time. It is up until this week when I actually wrote and spoke to the president, and I told him that I've got this hearing where I need to appear. And that was the first time that I had that I was privy to this information. So this, to answer the question, has been in place for the longest of time.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay. And then in proceeding to my next slide, I'd like to leave my audience with this one question, that who are these grants assisting? Which communities are the grants assisting? My next slide is a picture of a facility in Tembisa. Tembisa Cricket Club plays in our Premier League. And this is a picture of their facilities that was taken in 2018. Fortunately, as the chairman of the facilities committee, I've had the privilege of visiting these facilities, and the state hasn't improved. This is what they currently look like. My next point is going to speak to matters of facilities, and I will highlight why I wanted you to get this picture before I delve into it.
So you say it has improved or it has not improved since 2018?
Sorry?
Did you say this facility in Tembisa, has it improved or not since the last picture was taken?
And so my next point is going to speak to that, but to answer the question, it has not improved. This is the current state of these facilities.
Okay.
And what's interesting to highlight is that Tembisa is a Premier League club. I've spoken about the different clubs within the union, and Premier League is where, as I mentioned, our semi-pros are identified and where the players that go on to represent Easterns are identified. Now, when you've got a club that is meant to compete in that league, practicing in these facilities, I won't even go on to the conversation of the equipment that they've got access to, because unfortunately, cricket is a sport. Equipment within cricket plays a big factor, a huge factor. But I won't even go onto that conversation. Looking at where the Premier League side in Ntsebeza, where they have to prepare themselves for competition against clubs that are practicing in facilities that are close to professional standard. It makes one wonder the gap that this perpetuates between the different clubs. Because as you can imagine, if you are practicing here, these nets are made of AstroTurf. Cricket matches are not played on AstroTurf. AstroTurf is where there's concrete and carpet. These, as a coach and as a person that has played cricket, I can say that these facilities do not prepare you well for a cricket match that happens on turf. But then let me move on to speak to facilities and our journey within Easterns regarding facilities. As I mentioned earlier, this issue of facilities is not unique to our union. Outside of a handful of clubs, as I said, it is still a rarity to find fields within most townships. However, what I do believe is unique in our instance is the fact that in 2018, the Honorable Judge Mwepe, the Honorable Judge Bernard Mwepe, facilitated an inquiry into the matter of emerging clubs in Eastern's Cricket Union. This inquiry came about following unresolved grievances between emerging clubs and ECU. Emerging clubs, so I won't mention that because we've covered it already. Because we did say that you are familiar with what emerging clubs are. Okay, so part of these grievances submitted were the issues of facilities within the union. There was a long list of grievances, but I'm only going to touch on this one and potentially a second one later on in my conversation. At the time, emerging clubs felt that they had been neglected by the union for so many years, as the union had done very little to introduce facilities within townships, and they had not created a fund to help address these issues. At the time of the inquiry, the then CEO, Mr. Kazim Suleiman, and the president of Easterns, Mr. Gary Coren, said that leading up to the hearings, 2 million had been unlocked for the purpose of addressing these issues. I'd like to read you what the Mwepe report's finding was. I'll read you a snippet of it. He said there's been a lack of provision of facilities in these areas of emerging clubs. In fact, they've been neglected. This has been an issue as far as 2012. I doubt whether the unblocked amount of 2 million would be sufficient even to make a dent, given the description of the neglect. We further on went to make the following recommendation. The issue of facilities is very important. It is crucial for the identification and development of talent, all of which cannot be done unless there are facilities in underdeveloped areas. This is a matter which CSA should take a keen interest to, and if need be, play a supervisory role in terms of demanding periodic feedback. It is crucial to the greater goal of achieving a representative sporting code. Given the duration and extent of the neglect, the 2 million allocated is not going to be enough. More money should be allocated. All these to be done in close consultation with the emerging clubs. After all, they know their needs. Some kind of program should be structured to show commitment. So that was his recommendation at the time. I believe it's also worth mentioning that following this inquiry by Judge Ngwebe, the then president and CEO of the union resigned. Now, I've shown you the picture of what Tembisa looks like. It is now the end of July 2021, more than 2 years after the recommendations of Judge Ngwebe. And to date, only 500,000 of the funds promised have been spent. And this 500,000 was all spent in May 2019. The obvious question is, what happened to the rest of the funds? Well, it doesn't stop there. In 2019, the union was further granted what I believe is 1.3 million from the lotto. Sorry. They were further granted 1.3 million from the lotto for development. Details, unfortunately, I have not been privy to, which is why I say it's what I believe is 1.3 million. Such information is hard to get hold of within our union, as I pointed to the information around the grants. The 1.3 million was meant to be in addition to the 2 million that was initially promised. But as a council member at Easterns, I do not know where these funds are. And what is interesting is that as a member of the emerging clubs and a member of council, the only way I came to know about this lotto money is having spoken to people in passing. This is not information that was brought back to our council members that we've been allocated this money and what it's intended for. I've only learned about it in passing from conversations that I've had with individuals that have worked at the office.
But when did you learn about that, Mr. Moloko? About the,
So,
let's talk about the 1.3 million.
So as the chairperson of the facilities committee, I've had continuous engagement with the board regarding the rest of the funds that was to be utilized. And in my interrogating the rest of the funds, I then learned that the initial 2 million that was allocated was no longer there. And that instead what the board was going to do is that they were going to look at getting the lotto money that had come in and use that for facility. So it was through those conversations where I learned about this. And I would say it was quite, if I had to put a time frame to it, I believe it was somewhere last year.
Okay, you get the answer that the initial 2 million rands is no longer there. What does that mean? When they say it's no longer there, what does that mean?
That is my question, exactly. That we were told that the initial 2 million was set aside.
Yes.
Then, with the transitions that have happened within our board, the board members that come in say that the 2 million is not there.
Meaning what? Disappeared?
That is the question.
And so you say you found about the 1.3 million from Lotto when you were inquiring about the balance of the initial 2 million. And you say it was around May 2019 or 2020? When was this?
Yes.
So since then, have you raised the issue formally within the council, and have you raised it formally? And what's been the response?
Yes, I have. So the fortunate thing about how I work is I keep a paper trail.
Yes.
I've written numerous emails inquiring about this. Within our council, I am known as the facilities person because almost at every council meeting, I will ask about facilities. And in actual fact, at our last council meeting, I asked about this. And the question that was thrown back at me is that, but we should ask you, since you are the facilities committee chairperson. Now, what's interesting about being the chairperson of the facilities committee is that it is the title with zero power. I have got emails when the initial facilities project was completed. I have got emails where I was engaging with the board and the operational staff to give the plans that were already in place to roll out the next phase of the project. We had done quotations and the planning was in place for the work to commence. There are emails where I sent asking for the work to commence. And this goes as far back as, if I'm not mistaken, late 2019. Those emails were never actioned. My last request at council was around that our union currently has $1 million that is set in our budget. It reflects $1 million. And when I inquired what is that $1 million for, the answer was that it's for facilities. And when I asked, so why has it not been utilized? The response was, we should ask you as the facilities committee, even though I've got a track record showing that we've been asking for the project's comments. And what again is also interesting is that the amount is now 1 million. So it's an amount that keeps on changing.
But who gave you that answer? Who said we should be asking you as the chairperson of facilities?
That was Mr. Adrian Landsberg, who is currently a director on the board.
Who sits as a director?
Yes.
Yeah. So have you formally, and I'm not privy to how the operations work, have you placed the matter formally before the board?
So I'm going to speak to the structures within our union,
sure,
which I believe is a great concern.
Sure.
I'll speak to that because they do not empower us to raise these matters within governance committees and so forth. So what we've done in the past is that we would engage with the board and the office via email. And following the council meeting, I then sent an email asking for a meeting with the board for us to finalize the way forward with regards to facilities. This council meeting, I believe, if my memory serves me well, was about 2 months ago. To date, I think a month ago, I was told that the board would be meeting and that there will be feedback. But yet to date, I do not have formal feedback about the way forward on facilities.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Please proceed.
So in essence, these are the two issues I wanted to bring before you today. Before I close, I would like to answer the question, what are the remedial actions that I hope for? And these speak to the Wepe report. The issue,
sorry, before you go there,
So-
because before you do your
Yes.
closing remarks, I think one of your colleagues was here in the morning, and he spoke about the Emerging Clubs Forum. And one of the questions we raised was, what is the relationship between the Emerging Clubs Forum and the board? And you said earlier that you are a member of the Emerging Clubs Forum, and you serve in the council as well. So, am I right in then saying, therefore, that members of the Emerging Clubs Forum also participate in the governance structures of the union as we speak?
my short answer would be no.
Then how come you are?
So the members of the emerging clubs are chairmen of the various black clubs within the union.
Sure.
And because we are chairmen of the clubs within the union, we by default then are members of the union's council. We sit at the union's council. And what is then supposed to happen is that the union is supposed to have subcommittees that support its functioning. And those subcommittees are made up of governance, there'll be a facilities committee, there's various subcommittees that are supposed to be in place. It is only, and if I may, I would like to follow this in sequence, because what I'm about to say speaks to those subcommittees. So my remedial actions that I would hope for from this conversation, the first one is pretty straightforward. I think it's an obvious one, that the matrix for the grants, and I believe that this probably exists in other provinces and other unions as well. But these matrices need to change. And they need, if assistance is going to be given to clubs, it needs to take into mind the communities that these clubs come from. And it's interesting, and I make this statement coming from Midrand Cricket Club, because Midrand Cricket Club, as I mentioned earlier, is made up of members that come from two different communities. If you come to Midrand, the average income per household there is much higher than what you'd find in a township. And I make the statement that we need to relook the matrix, knowing that at some point it will also disadvantage my club. But that's not the point. The point is that assistance needs to go where it is needed the most. My second remedial action that I hope for is better oversight from CSA. In his finding in the 2019 report, Judge Mwepe highlighted the issue of facilities. As I've explained, but he also highlighted a critical issue, and that issue was the non-existence of functioning subcommittees. He asked CSA to play an oversight role in ensuring that corrective measures were in place. This, however, unfortunately, and I'll say it again, unfortunately, did not happen. The results of that not happening was that in a space of 2 years, Eastern's Union then again found themselves in front of Judge Mwepe. And the second time round, it was to deal with the irregular removal of the president at the time. In this second encounter, the judge gave a damning report. And this report was damning towards the current board that we have in place now. Some of the comments from there was that in his findings, there was material non-compliance with the provisions of Section 71 of the Compliance Act regarding the board's removal of the president.
Of which act?
He also mentioned...
Which act?
Sorry, apologies.
Section 71 of which act?
Section 71, 4 of the Companies Act.
Oh.
Yeah, you came across as saying Compliance Act.
Yes.
Sure, thank you.
Yes. He also pointed to breaches in our MOI. Now, there is a long, he gives lengthy remarks that speak to these. This report went to CSA. And my biggest concern, my biggest gripe has been that when a person reads that report, it is so damning that I believe it should prompt action. But yet, to date, the board that is implicated in that report has not been held to account. And that is pretty much the end of my submission.
Can I ask you a question arising
Yes,
from what you said? Can you talk about the autonomy of unions from the CSA?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The autonomy of unions from the CSA. As we understand it, the unions are pretty much autonomous. So there's a fine line. There's issues
Yes.
on which the CSA can say, no, we can't interfere because the unions are autonomous. So we really want you to talk to that issue. What is the effect of the autonomy of the unions from the CSA? One of the remedial actions you recommend is that there must be better oversight by CSA over unions, I assume. But again, as we understand it, the unions are autonomous. So please speak to that issue. What is the impact of the autonomy of unions from CSA? What does it do? What effect does it have on the game?
So it's detrimental, in short. The CSA as the mother body provides a large portion of the funds that goes to the two unions. I've spoken about facilities and what they are meant for, what they mean to black clubs. In addition to that, there's a large portion of money that CSA allocates to hubs and RPCs. And it is critical that as the person that is putting in the investment, and I think the layman's understanding is that as an investor, you've got a vested interest to know what happens to your investment. Because at the end of the day, if an investor invests and walks away and trusts that the investment will be used accordingly, should you come across, and I'd like to maybe spend some time in responding to this. And firstly, let me just say that the dynamics of our country currently are that the typical black person that grows up in the township grows up, completes schooling, and having completed schooling, then goes on to seek employment, whether that's via going to tertiary first and then going to work, whatever the case. And what you find with the black population, unfortunately, is that once we are established, the majority move out of the townships. So when I'm talking black clubs, predominantly clubs that are in the township, it then tells you that these clubs are run by chairmen that are from the township. And when I look at the composition of our chairmen, these are chairmen that either have no employment, they do not have the fortune or the privilege of working in big corporates that gives them exposure in working within structures. It doesn't give them that corporate experience that places one at an advantage when it comes to running a cricket club. Now, this individual is then chairman, and I've seen how that alone puts black clubs at a disadvantage. When you've got a chairman that is unemployed or has got your entry-level employment, and that chairman needs to step up and get involved at council level, they are immediately faced with immediate issues. I attended AGM recently within our union for our junior structures. And to my disappointment, upon arriving at the AGM, there was a handful of black clubs represented. If I'm not mistaken, there were 5 black clubs represented. And as I pointed out earlier, there are 16 clubs, with 16 black clubs within the union. And avoiding the instinct of rushing quickly to blame, I spent some time thinking about this. And this is what I realized, that the meeting happened midweek at 7 o'clock or 7 p.m. Now, knowing that a good number of our black chairmen are not fortunate to have their own transport, they use public transport. And here is an AGM that is there to elect. So I just want to say that, okay, let me pass that. Here's an AGM that is there to elect individuals that are going to drive the conversation for junior cricket. The black clubs are not represented. Chances are that the chairperson that you're going to walk away with, that you will get walking away from the conversation, is a chairperson that doesn't understand the plight of our black clubs because they are not from those communities. And this is what I've seen playing out repeatedly within the union. So when you get to a meeting like that, the notion is that these clubs that are not there simply do not care, simply are not interested or whatever. It's very few people that realize, because had this committee, for instance, realized the immediate challenge that a black chairperson would have, in that if you have a meeting that's midweek at 7 o'clock, they will struggle to get there because taxis at that time are difficult to find, there are issues of safety and so on. So getting back to the question, if CSA is going to be giving unions money for development, they need to understand that development sometimes is going to people that are almost cannot stand for themselves, if I can put it that way. And if it is left to the union to run, and it is very, so the outcomes of the juniors meeting, we elected a fantastic guy. My only question would be, did we elect a chairperson that understands everybody's circumstances? Will that chairperson go and set a meeting for all the clubs during the week at the same time? Does he understand that half of his members will struggle to get there? So, and I believe these are factors that CSA needs to realize, that sometimes the people that they're trying to assist are helpless to speak or to stand for themselves within the union that they are giving the money to. So when that money is received within the union, it is at times the people that do not understand the issues that are faced by the people that those funds are trying to assist. So it is vital that CSA plays an active role within the unions in terms of transformation and things like that. I know it's a roundabout way of answering the question, but I hope I've answered.
Yeah. Oh.
No, go ahead.
Well, in the Eastern Cricket Union, in your experience, has there ever been time dedicated to interrogating the whole concept of transformation, what it means, what it is intended to achieve, whether it is at that level, at Eastern's Cricket Union, or has there ever been any effort by Cricket South Africa to communicate with the Eastern's Cricket Union and convey to the Eastern's Cricket Union that transformation is part and parcel of the policy directions of Cricket South Africa? In other words, maybe I want just to find out whether in your experience, in your involvement with cricket, there has been a formalized approach to transformation, whether it is racial transformation on the basis of race and transformation on the basis of gender.
So in my opinion, I believe the structures are there. I believe the plans are there. That on CSA side, or the plans are there, and the unfortunate thing is the conversation on transformation is not complete up until all stakeholders are at the table. And so when the question is asked on whether have I experienced any efforts from Eastern's side, it will be difficult to answer, because I can tell you now that we had, following the first Mwepe report, which highlighted the lack or the non-existence of the subcommittees, we then had CSA coming to Eastern. So CSA has been there. And we had lengthy conversations about what the first report detailed. We had Welsh, who came and took us through a process that was supposed to help us establish these subcommittees. Unfortunately, the first unfortunate part is when you call AGM, everybody shows up. Pretty much all the white clubs are there. But for such sittings, it's almost, there's a disinterest from the white clubs. So if the union was to initiate conversations around transformation, those conversations would be for one race group. And it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate because the lack of transformation affects all of us. And I personally believe that the answer to the issues of transformation do not only sit with the Black communities, they also sit with the white communities. I personally believe that it will take us far longer to come to an answer for these issues up until it will take us far longer while the white communities are not there. So in short, amongst the emerging clubs, we could speak conversations around transformation, start initiatives, but coming from Easterns, fully supported by all the clubs at Easterns, I'm yet to see such.
Is there any women's cricket in the Easterns?
Yes, there is. There is. It's the short answer. There is. My personal opinion, I believe it is not where it should be, and more specifically amongst the Black clubs. I think looking at the challenges that are faced by the Black clubs, the journey of developing women's cricket within these clubs is still a long way away. Currently, from the top of my mind, I believe it is only the Premier League clubs that have got women's side or women's sides. From the top of my mind, I speak under correction, but it's a handful. But yes, the structures are there for women's leagues. They're probably not at the level where they should be, because I will say that my understanding of the women's structures, as the chairman of the Midrand Cricket Club, we currently do not have a women's side. So my exposure to the operations of women's cricket is limited. But having said that, it's interesting that, sorry, I meant to mention this, and so I'll use this opportunity to mention it.
Yeah. Our
Club was due for, so because of the community that part of our club is from, I believe as a Black club, it places us at an advantage where we can play a developmental role within Black cricket within Easterns. So that has been our journey within the union very soon after we joined the union. And this journey, on this journey, I've been engaging quite a lot with the union. I've basically been knocking on the door to become a Premier League club. We're currently not a Premier League club. And on my first conversation with the union on us becoming a Premier League club, we were refused the opportunity, and I believe rightfully so. We didn't win the league. It made sense why we were not given the opportunity. But what struck me was that there's a club within the Premier League, Springs All Boys, that finished bottom of the league during that season. And when I went and I interrogated how they finished bottom of the league, I realized that they were penalized for some matches where they failed to field enough players of color. That struck a chord with me. Then move along to, I believe what was about 2 years later, our club had grown much stronger. We were better positioned for the move to Prem. And leading up to that season, we were told that just a step back. The season following the Springs All Boys season, there is a white club that finished ahead of us that got promoted into the Premier League. So initially, there were 8 white clubs in the Premier League and 4 black clubs. And with the promotion of the white club, it took the ratio to 9 white clubs and 4 black clubs, which again for me, what I felt was a passing up of an opportunity, because to have a pipeline that feeds players of color into our provincial side, we need as many as possible strong black clubs. And I personally believe that the union needs to be active in developing those strong black clubs. Nonetheless, this white club was promoted, but what struck me in that instance was that that club was promoted having played a season with less than required number of players of color. Nonetheless, my conversation came again when I had to stand in front of the people that run club cricket and request that we be promoted. One of the reasons that I was told that we cannot be promoted was the fact that we didn't have a women's side. The club, white club that were promoted, having failed to field enough players of color in the season leading up to their promotion, also didn't have a women's side, but they were promoted. And yet, when our conversation came, and the conversation came having been promised initially that after the increase to 13 clubs, what the union would do is that they were looking to grow their Premier League pool, that the next season they would promote a black club so that the Premier League has 14 sides. When our opportunity came, we were then told that because you do not have a woman's side, you will not be promoted. Now, this is a conversation that I'm pretty famous for within the union, because I've been knocking on getting into Prem for the longest of while because of the impacts that I believe our club will have on black cricket. I've made peace with the fact that we need to win our league to get promotion. But yet, this is a conversation that keeps cropping up. So the last time it cropped up, the members that run club cricket stance had changed. It was now no longer a fact that you can't get promoted because we didn't have a women's side. Now it is like, no, go back and win the league. Go back and win the league, which is where we are now. So again, that is like so I've got probably lengthy conversations to have around this matter, which is probably why I'm going around the long way in responding to some of the questions.
But Mr. Moloko, what have you done about getting women's side of the ground in your club?
So the journey of cricket development is not a 2-year plan. For you to do it right, you have to start at the grassroots level. And this, I suppose, comes with experience. So how most clubs operate and how our club personally operates is that we rotate chairmen every 5 years. Every year, and the chairman has got the length of service that they're allowed is 5 years. And I'm now in my 4th year, and sadly, is that it's taken me a while to awaken to the conversations around development of junior cricket. Because if you're going to introduce women's cricket, you cannot do that with a girl that's already in high school. It has to start with girls that are 8 years old, if not younger. And Now, this is the challenge with our women's league within the union, is that we've got age group cricket for boys, but age group cricket doesn't exist for girls. Meaning that if we introduce an 8-year-old, which we've done in recent times, is that when you look at our under 10 sides, you will find young girls there. And that is the correct way to develop a young black female cricketer.
Are they playing alongside boys? Are the girls playing alongside boys?
That is correct.
Oh.
That is correct. Because the union currently doesn't have age group cricket for ladies.
Yeah.
Meaning that for our club, for instance, for you to see a competitive women's side made up of only women, it will take us at least 4 years if we are starting from 8 years old. For those young girls to play with boys and develop up until they get to the age where they can then compete within the league for women that is within the union.
Mr. Maluko, when the chair asked you whether there are any formal structures in place to deal with transformation at ECU, you said that there are plans and there are formal structures. I just want to understand, when it comes to this issue of club grants, where white clubs are getting twice as much as the black clubs in terms of the budget allocation, where are these transformation structures to maybe speak on this or, oppose it or have different recommendations?
So when I said there are structures, sorry, let me clarify maybe. So when I said that there are structures, I meant that there are structures within CSA. Coming down to Easterns, we do not have structures. Which is why I said that the second point that I wanted to highlight in the 2019 WEPE report was that those structures are not in place within Easterns. The current, having realized this and having had lengthy conversations around this with the current board, they are now endeavoring to put those structures in place. They're busy in the last, I think it was in like the last few months, they've sent out communication trying to get club members or club chairpersons to step forward for those committees. But again, my concern and my issue there is that I was elected by emerging clubs as the facilities committee chairperson. I raised my hand to say that I'm available to serve within the facilities committee. The communication for the setting up of this committee was over 2 months ago. I am yet to hear anything about the committee. And what concerns me there is I'm already at a position of discomfort when it comes to the current board that we have. And that discomfort arises from the second WEPE report that was issued, where the board acted in an irregular manner. And the second WEPE report details what one would call shady dealings by the current board. So when the question of those structures, when the question comes up on whether those structures are there, I do not have confidence that the process of putting those structures in place will be fair and transparent.
No, thank you very much. My last question then is, why the refusal to, I don't know if you said the president refused to give you this breakdown of the club grants. Is it the current president that refused to previously give you this breakdown?
That is correct.
And do you know why that is the case?
So the short answer is I believe I've wanted to challenge this conversation for the longest of time, and it was to avoid that confrontation. When what I've detailed in the grants report is going to be news to a lot of black and possibly white chairmen, because we've never had this issue, and I'm hoping that it will spark a conversation. And I believe that is what was being avoided.
So are you saying that in essence, the Eastern's Union is not running its affairs transparently?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. When you talk about the Eastern Cricket Union, are we talking about an integrated cricket union in terms of race and gender, or only in terms of race? Or what are we talking about? And what is the demographic representation if, in fact, it is a union that is populated by all race groups?
Sorry, can I please ask that you repeat the question?
So when we talk about the Eastern's Cricket Union, are we talking about an integrated union in terms of race? In other words, are we talking of a union where we have got blacks, as you have defined them, that is African, colored, and Indian, and then white? Or what are we talking about? Who are we talking about when we talk about the Eastern's Cricket Union? And if it is an integrated race group, what is the demographic representation within that race group? Or is that this, contained in the that was dealing with grants?
So when I'm speaking integration, it's purely by race. And I do not think we're at the point where we can even speak gender yet, unfortunately. And integration within Easterns is actually quite interesting. That it's almost forced integration. That, as my first slide demonstrated, that there are 30 clubs within the union. 16 of those are black and 14 are white. So when I'm speaking about a club, it's some clubs constitutes of both male and female cricket. So I have not timed up a picture which I can say now would be a gloomy picture if I had to go and separate women's representation within that demographic.
Yeah. So, in a way, the union is composed of clubs that operate in racial silos.
Pretty much so, yes.
And is there a point where, and what is that point, where all the racial groups or all the various clubs get united to take decisions for the entire union? And what is the demographic representation at that structure, if you follow what I'm saying?
I do. So yes, there is, and that is our members council, and which is why I wanted to point out the typical black chairman that you would find amongst the black clubs.
Yeah.
That when it comes to decision making, the representation, and I will challenge the union actually to present this, that when you look at, and we would make combined decisions at AGM or at a members council meeting. And as a start, I would challenge the union to give a representation of what the demographics looked like at the meetings where these decisions had to be made. Which is why I wanted to highlight the challenges that are faced by black chairmen. That when these sittings come, generally, the first obstacle that they have is that is transportation to these meetings. Are they able to get there? And once they've gotten there, they are then faced with, because and I come from that background, so I understand that stepping into certain environments and being able to articulate yourself in what is, after all, our second language, and there are challenges there already. That not every person is comfortable stepping into certain environments and expressing themselves in the English language. And what you find is that that again is a second obstacle, that when you come to those meetings, there are certain club chairmen that do not have a voice, not because they don't have a voice or that they don't have an opinion, but it is the dynamics of our country, unfortunately.
Either the conversation is in English or is in Afrikaans.
Not Afrikaans, fortunately enough. Those days are long gone.
Right.
But it's generally in English. Well, not generally, it's purely in English.
And what you are saying is that the black clubs do not necessarily use English as a medium of expression when they are in their clubs. But when they are representative of their clubs in the union, then they ought to speak. And sometimes they get compromised because, firstly, it is the language that they must master before they convey their ideas through the language in order to make their points understood.
Exactly. And what I want to add to that is that what we as black people understand is that comes with certain no, maybe let me put it differently. So it comes with, there's a certain fear that comes with speaking the English language sometimes. That the people that are not fluent in speaking the language would rather keep quiet, even though they've got important points to make, than what would be seen as making a fool of themselves because of how they speak the language or because of how they sound. So the point here that I'm making is that even though these sittings might happen sometimes, the people sitting there don't necessarily have a voice because of the background that they're coming from, which places them at a disadvantage. So let me put it this way. If you look at the picture that I presented, that you've got the middle class, which is pretty much the white clubs. Then your lower level class is pretty much the black clubs that come from the township. Then you put these two groups together, I think it stands to reason that the person that's going to dominate the conversation is the middle class because of the exposure that money gives them, and the exposure that their employment gives them, and
their level of education.
Obviously, with that also comes the level of education, correct?
Yeah. Is there any hope?
Definitely. That is why we are here. Definitely. What I've found and what I'm grateful for is the challenges of racism as we know them in the past is probably less than what it used to be, like far less. When I speak about our white clubs, I speak about club chairmen that are engaged with on a regular. And these are good gentlemen, predominantly. I think what sets us apart is perspective. That having not come from some of these communities, a lot of the stakeholders involved in this conversation do not have the perspective that might be needed to address these issues. But that said, I also believe that when you look at the standard of cricket and what Cricket South Africa has been able to produce through past leadership, through past cricketing sides and so forth, I think there is expertise and there is value in all members that are at the table. I believe this is a journey, but is there hope? I believe definitely so.
Let me ask probably a silly question. Are you familiar with a book by Steve Biko? The title is I Write What I Like.
Yes, I am.
Yes. You know, I couldn't but remember some of the points he makes when you talked about how some of the black club representatives do not have a voice when they have a voice, because the language is a barrier, the nature of which makes it difficult for them to be heard, not only to be heard, but to be heard in a manner in which they would like to be heard. And if I understood you well, these are people who want to express the views that they believe in, but are not able to do so, or they refrain from expressing those views because of the language barrier and because of an inferiority complex that they sometimes feel because they equate fluent expression in a foreign language as they equate that with intelligence. That you are only intelligent and are able to convey your ideas if you are also able to express them in a foreign language. No one nowadays thinks of what the converse could be. If, for instance, in your area you speak isiSwati or isiNdebele or isiSotho, I wonder how many white cricketers would be confident if the discourse was in a predominant African language in all the meetings. I'm sure it would be a non-starter, would it not?
Sorry, I'd like you to repeat the last portion that you, where you were asking the question.
No,
but before you do that, I just want to add to what you were saying.
Yes.
And say that, to speak to that point, I've only been with Eastern's Cricket Union for, I think it's 4 or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. And my experiences within Eastern's Cricket Union is a drop in the ocean compared to the unfair treatment that a lot of the club chairmen that are now currently sitting at home. My question when I was coming here was that ideally I shouldn't be the one that is speaking here. My experiences are just a tiny, a fraction in comparison to the people that are sitting at home who can probably spend the whole day here telling you about the unfair treatment that they've experienced. And I asked myself, but why have our club chairmen not stepped forward? And the only way I can make sense of it is basically what we are talking about.
Now, yes, I agree with you there. Now, what I was saying was, we sometimes take it for granted. For instance, look here in this very session, we take it for granted that the language that we use to communicate is English. And those for whom English is a vernacular, is a mother tongue language, always assume that it should be so for others. Yeah. And yet, I don't think it has ever crossed their minds that if, for instance, at a meeting of the Eastern's Cricket Union, the dominant language or the language of expression, for once, even if it was as an experiment, was the indigenous language, there would be large, there would be large expressions of this is unfair. Or put it the other way around. If you insisted and you came from your club and you were vendor speaking, all of you, and at every time you stood up to make your point, you did it in your mother tongue, there is an assumption in our country that that would be unfair because nobody understands your language. And yet it is established that, well, it's a well-established fact that people express themselves best if they express themselves in their mother tongue. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
So this is very much, this inquiry, the more we listen to people like you, the more we realize that the problem is much, much more complex than just a question of racial discrimination that is unfair, gender discrimination that is unfair. It's multi-layered. And part of the problem, part of what causes the barrier to entry for those who have not been inside, the structures that determine who plays and who does not play. Language has also been part of the problem there. And in thanking you for having created time to come and be with us, I just want to let you know that I take away from this conversation the critical point that you have made, and that is, there are many of those black cricketers or black administrators or black members of clubs who attend union meetings, who have got a voice, who have got views that they would express, but who become overwhelmed at a meeting where the language of expression is not theirs, and find sometimes that views, very valid views that they had, which they could easily have expressed about how the demography of the club should be, why it should be, those views remain unexpressed because of the language barrier. And I think you have made a point that is really going to have to exercise our minds as we contemplate this complex issue of gender and race discrimination. But you have added a dimension to it, that language also is part of the problem. And for that, I thank you, and I wish we had more time to engage in this debate, because I cannot underestimate that what one learns from these kinds of discourses. But time is the enemy of all of us, and I have to thank you very much for having made the effort to be with us and share your ideas with us. Yeah.
Thank you for indulging me. Thank you very much.
Okay, we shall adjourn till tomorrow.
No, we have.
Oh yeah,
it's
by the way.
lunch.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay, what time is it?
It's almost 10 to 2, maybe until 3, and we'll listen to 1.
We shall adjourn till we'll take the lunch hour now. And where are we at? Yeah. It's 2 o'clock. Adjourn till 2 o'clock.
3.
Till 3 o'clock.
Yes.
Oh, it's 2 o'clock. 3 o'clock. We shall take.